Thank you, Margaret. And I hope that the fact that it was read twice has just really triggered extra thoughts with you. And it also, the conversations that you may have been able to have with other people, you suddenly see it from a different lens, really, because you're seeing some of the things that they saw from it. So I just pray now that the words of my mouth, the meditations of all our hearts are acceptable in your sight, Lord and Redeemer. Amen. I think it's an amazing story. It's a really incredible story, and we don't hear it very often. But actually, at Christ Church, it's a very special story because, of course, we have one of the windows at the back. It's the one in that corner there, dedicated to this story. And one of the most fantastic things that's happened when we've brought the children over from Sanborn is that we take them up to the altar bit, and we can actually tell the whole story of Jesus in that little bit. But not only does it stop, well, let me say, it starts, you've got Jesus on the cross. On the side, you've got Jesus coming out of the tomb. Then you've got him ascending into heaven. So the children recognize those things. You've got the great big frieze of the Lord's Supper. And then you turn to the side, because it hasn't stopped there, it's gone on. It's moved on to the New Testament stories and the early church. So it's been lovely to be able to take the children up there to actually see the stories for themselves. Let's have a focus. What was I going to say? One of the things it does do is as we look at the window, it makes us think of the window that we get, that view of the early church, what's happening then and there. Because we see Peter at work, and we see miracles, and we see a resurrection. Of all things, we see a resurrection. That's why I can't believe that we don't hear that story more often. It's big stuff. And we see the actions of an early church community. We know quite a bit about Peter before this story. We know that he was a friend of Jesus. We know that he's heard Jesus teaching at first hand. We know he's seen Jesus' miracles. He's lived through the crucifixion. He's met him after death. And we know that he let Jesus down. And most comfortingly, we know that he was clearly forgiven. We know that he was told to take care of Jesus' flock. He was there at Pentecost. He was there at the formation of the Christian community as the community became church. But now we're seeing Peter in a different light. Peter is a travelling preacher. It reminds me a bit of the bishop going out and checking his flock. And he's travelling to all the different communities that are Christian round him, really preaching again and encouraging them in their faiths. It was really interesting this week when our new bishop was announced, the Very Reverend Stephen Lake. The first thing that he said he would be doing is going round and seeing us all, meeting us, encouraging and preaching to us. So he is very much following in Peter's footsteps. And for the town of Joppa, Peter is the most important, powerful person they could think of. Let's just focus on Tabitha. Tabitha was sick and died. Her body was washed. They'd been put in an upstairs room to cool down. The disciples knew that Peter was in Lydda, so they sent 2 men to go and get him. Please come at once. And Peter came. I wonder what they're expecting to happen. Were they expecting to share their grief, just to tell the story of this amazing woman who had made these wonderful garments for the poor? Did they want somebody to lead the burial? Or did they really expect anything more? It made me wonder, as a church community, as individuals, do we ask for prayer when it's needed? And do we endorse the power of prayer by actually actioning it, going and asking people and doing it ourselves? I'm not sure that I always do. In the story, Peter gets there and there is this cacophony of noise. In those days, the tradition was for widows to wail and cry. In fact, they would actually hire people to come and make that noise of grief and crying as you went to see the body of the person that had died. So there would have been all this noise, people coming around sharing their stories of grief, people sharing their stories of Tabitha. They then were showing Peter the robes and the other clothing that she'd made for the poor. What happens next? Peter stops and sends them out of the room, kneels and prays. I wondered how much we make that space to focus on our prayer, to be with God closely. Do we send everybody out? Do we humble ourselves to kneel, metaphorically or physically? And do we find ourselves a thin space to try and connect with God? Perhaps when you heard the story the second time, you may have picked up really closely the parallels that there are in the gospel stories, the stories of Jesus. Get up and roll up your mat, Aeneas is told. That's the parallel there to the paralysed man at Bethsaida. Did it sound familiar to the Jairus' story, daughter's story that we know so well? Especially when people are sent out of the room and when Peter uses the word, get up. Does it resonate with the raising of Lazarus? As you spot these parallels, I know that I became aware that what Peter was doing was embodying Jesus' work. He was getting into that body and being the hands and feet. The power that Jesus had is now in Peter and the apostles, and indeed us. The work of Jesus didn't die. It's alive, just as Jesus is alive. The work of God is alive and on the move. And we're called to step into that role too, to carry on the work of Jesus. We may not see extraordinary healings, and even less likely we see resurrections, but even without those miraculous resurrections and healings, our hope as people of faith, as disciples of Jesus, is that we know that death cannot and will not overcome life. So Peter carries on Jesus' work, but it's not only him that's carrying on the work, it's Tabitha. Yes, Jesus didn't sew garments as far as we're aware, but he made it clear that we were to love God and to love our neighbour as ourselves. When we look around the congregation here today, we can't see the people at home, but those people are included in this as well. We have many, many Tabithas, many male and female Tabithas. We've got sewers, but also chatters, supporters, volunteers, teachers, healers, dusters, food preparers. The list just goes on and on. And it doesn't matter how small those jobs are. Those are all part of what we can offer today in our church. So why did Christ Church choose this window to go up there? Well, I think most of you know that this church was built to serve the poor. And the poor people around this area had built their land, it was on wasteland and rubbish that they were building their houses. In 1830, this building was described as a huge, oblong, naked hall. Not very attractive. So the addition 40 years later of the chancel, this bit behind me, and the vestry over there, and the stained glass windows that we're talking about, added to beautify the church and inform. Because those people that couldn't actually read and write could see those stories and resonate with those stories. It's a great reminder to the congregation now and then of our work in the community, of our work of being the hands and feet of Jesus as Peter's and Tabitha's. And isn't it amazing that we can be encouraged in this way by the story, by the windows, to actually carry on doing the work we know we've been told to do? Jesus is not dead. He lives in us. Let's be encouraged to do his work today, however we can. And let's thank those people that came before us in our congregation for having the vision to put that picture up there to inspire us today. And how appropriate it is, as we are trying to discern the vision for the future, that we've got that to remember and jerk our memories into what we should be doing today. Amen.